Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic Re.Con, Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And before we get to this week's guest, I want to remind you to subscribe. Visit eddietrask.com/sponsorship to help support the cause. And also a reminder, new episodes air every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. With that, this week's guest is Mr. Bear Woznick. Welcome to the show, Bear.
Aloha, Eddie. Great to be here.
I want to do a proper introduction, and just so the viewers know that you're working on, and probably have been for most of your life, working on many different things. Bear is the host of the motorcycle-based reality TV show. It's called Long Ride Home with Bear Woznick. He's also a host of EWTN's The Bear Woznick Adventure, which is a radio show heard almost in all 50 states and over 500 radio stations. He's also the host of the 15-minute Ocean Sunrise Catechism, which is seen daily on Facebook Live. And lastly, but not least, he's the author of several books, including Deep in the Wave, A Surfing Guide to the Soul, and Deep Adventure, The Way of Heroic Virtue. So I mentioned a Bear. Hopefully that caught a big portion of what you're up to currently. And if not, you can get into the details in our chat.
Well, also, it's it kind of is good to give some more than the one-dimensional thing. I mean, because that's my walk with the Lord. But also, I'm a world champion tandem surfer and ninja black belt, and I've lived a real adventurous life. And that's why the name of our ministries is Deep Adventure Ministries. Our website's deepadventure.com, because I've had this adventure sort of history.
Sure.
But to us, the greatest adventure, our motto is that the most radical thing you can do in life is abandon yourself to the wild adventure of God's will. So though I've done all these different things, I'm a pilot, and skydiver and all these things like that, the greatest adventure is just abandoning yourself to God's will. Because when you abandon yourself to his will, you get to see him do stuff.
So true. That's great. Great. So why don't you, if you can, take us back to, I don't know if you were cradle and you reverted like I did. Why don't you go into your whole faith journey, and then you can weave some of the other adventures into it.
Well, I was raised as a Catholic. My mother was a Lutheran convert, so she was so devoted to the church. In fact, her becoming a Catholic, she was in a situation where she was basically being cared for by relatives because her mother died and her father was long gone. And when she began to go to the Catholic Church, she was told she needed to leave. So at 15, she left her home in order to remain a Catholic. And so you can imagine how strong her faith was. My father was raised Ukrainian Catholic.
Oh, wow.
So very different sort of experience, but part of the Roman, the Catholic Church. And so, yes, we went every Sunday. And my favorite thing was on Tuesdays to meet with the nuns afternoons at the little community center, and they gave us catechism. I just loved my little catechism times, the Baltimore Catechism. But as I got older, I began to contemplate the reality of God. I was sitting on the beach at Seacliff Beach near Santa Cruz, California, where I was raised. And I had a great experience, body surfing. I was probably 12 years old, 13, maybe 14. And then I look at these waves and I realize these waves are, I build my sandcastle and I come back in the morning, it's gone. The waves continue to break whether I'm here or not. And so it gave me a sense of that eternity, that they were breaking before I was born. They're going to be breaking after I'm gone. And then I saw a sailboat sailing over the horizon until the sails disappeared. And I had that sense of infinity, like that great beyond. And so in that moment, I had I would say that moment when you begin to search for the Holy Grail, you see it and then you search for it the rest of your life. And it was that sense of the infinite and the eternal and knowing the greatness of our Creator. And although I felt so tiny compared to all of that, I wouldn't say that I felt insignificant. I felt quite the opposite, that the God who made all this made me. Wow. And so then my quest began. And I was Catholic, but then in my junior year in high school, we moved to Waco, Texas. And I remember I started going to a Baylor University, the kind of Notre Dame of the Baptist church, because it was right in the same town where my family was. This was convenient, so that's where I ended up. And I remember talking to the assistant pastor in the back of the church. I would go to mass, but I would stand way in the back, even outside in the little entryway. He and I would talk. And we talked about Buddhism and all these other things. I mean, he was not a devoted Catholic, you know? And so that kind of didn't give me any traction at all. But at Baylor University, I began to notice these people that had a profound relationship with Jesus Christ. And I studied that we had to take classes. And so I studied the Old Testament, and then I studied the prophets. And that was required to do a couple religion courses. And then I just remember at one point, I started training in martial arts because of this Eastern religion that was popular then, and trying to see maybe there's an answer there. And then I took a philosophy class. It was like with one of the noted professors. There was only a dozen of us in this room. More like a boardroom, but just filled with these ancient books. You know, that when you walk into that kind of room and you can just smell the books.
Yep.
And we went through all the philosophers. And I don't remember who all we went through, but we didn't do Aquinas or Augustine, but I just remember I would read them and I go, these guys are so smart, they must be right. But at some point it would just feel like, no, they missed it. In the Plato's Republic sounds good until, yeah, it's not quite right, you know? And so as we went through all the philosophers, I didn't find my answer there. I didn't find it in the Catholic Church. I didn't find it in Eastern religion. And so I just kind of was the type of person, is at that time, as a junior in college, I was a virgin, as I was the night I got married. I didn't drink, didn't smoke. I just worked like crazy, because I remember having an epiphany once as a junior in high school that one day I could father an immortal being. And all my decisions, I was just so thrilled that I could be a father, that from that point forward, I just worked my butt off in order to someday provide for my family. So I was working actually 3 jobs, working at a CPA firm at night, in the afternoon, waiting tables in the evening, on the weekends, a baggage handler for a little airlines there. And so I had been good, but I would say it was kind of an uptight sort of righteousness, you know? And so I was kind of like, well, you know, the old word is wine, woman, and song, but my generation called it, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I thought, why don't I I was really kind of depressing, because like, if that's all there is, you know, if God is going to be the type of God who is like a father that's never home, he just sends child support checks in the form of rain and sunshine so we can, you know, survive, and not the kind of God that wants to have an intimate relationship, then why bother? It wasn't a rebellious statement. It was like just being depressed. But these Baylor students prayed for me. Most of my friends had this personal relationship with Jesus, and I loved Jesus. I just didn't know how to get there. That summer, end of my junior year, in June of that summer, I believe it was June 17th. In that summer, at one point, my mother said, "Hey, there's this Catholic charismatic prayer group that I go to, and these people really love Jesus. Maybe you should go." And I go, I don't know. Prayer meeting doesn't sound too interesting. She said, well, there's a priest there, and there's a few nuns, and there's a couple cute girls. And I thought, well, okay. And she said, I'll buy you a pair of blue jeans. So I went to this prayer meeting, and it was just beautiful, because the people, it's just a small, maybe 25 or people in a living room, packed people, and just this beautiful, intimate prayer was going on. People seemed to be having more of a dialogue than like religiosity prayers. And so I just told them afterwards, whatever this is, I want to have what you have. And then they said these things, which I think is so profound. They said, well, you know, you should think about it, because this is going to cost you everything. If you're going to ask the Lord to give your life to him and to experience the infusion of his Holy Spirit in a special way, you better think twice, because it requires you to give everything to the Lord. And so they said, you take a week, and when you come back, if you really want us to pray. So what I respect about that, and it's very Catholic, the thinking man's religion, is that they wanted me to count the cost. It wasn't an emotional decision.
Yeah.
It wasn't some hyped up situation. So I just recall that the night before, Monday night, I guess, before the Tuesday night meeting, all the good things used to seem to happen on Tuesdays. I had been reading the book of Acts, and as they asked me to do, and another book, I forget which one it was, and I'm prepared. I want this. And then I remember going to sleep, and I had one of those anointed dreams where Jesus came down the outdoor hallway in the apartment where I was living, and was coming to get me, to be with me. And I was so excited that I ran to the door, but as he opened the door, or we opened at the same time, but when I saw him, I just fell on the ground. I wanted to embrace him, but I just couldn't. I just fell. And there was just this sense of that the next night things would be really good. But I thought it would be more like I knew the Lord would love me and accepted me, but I felt the feeling that I would have when they prayed for me, if I had a feeling, was kind of like asking a girl out on a date and she said yes, kind of like that. But the next night I was there, and there was another a girl there about my age, a family friend. And we were, after the meeting, they said, well, we will pray with you. And so, as was the custom, you go back into a different room because you don't want to be a spectacle, right? And they began to ask me, do you want to surrender your life to the Lord? And Bob Schwartz put his hand on my shoulder, and immediately something unexpected happened. I was just infused with love. Just infused with such like a liquid, warm love. And I know at the same moment, the girl next to me was experiencing it too, because she had this laughter. She began to laugh with joy. And for me, it was like the Lord came into my apartment and filled it with light. But then he started opening drawers and closets and windows and said, Lord, don't open that one. Yeah, I'm going to open that one and forgive you. And I'm going to open that. And I just felt totally forgiven and totally alive. And then something really special happened as they continued to pray. I lifted up my arms. It wasn't like, it was just, I couldn't help but lift my arms in praise. And I began to pray in a new language. And it was interesting because the language that I prayed in, the Bible says we pray in the tongues of men and of angels. I would say this was more like the tongues of men. And I just prayed in this. And I knew in my way down in my knower that Jesus was Lord. I knew it all. I mean, I knew that Jesus was the Son of God, the Holy Trinity, because I'd been visited by the Holy Spirit too. And I had this profound love for the Father. I became the evangelist. People, it was just horrible if you were sitting at the cafeteria lunchroom alone, because I was going to sit with you. But when I went home that night, my dad said, well, what happened? And I said, well, this happened, Dad. And he said, well, let me hear this language. And of course, it's not a static utterance. The spirit of the prophets is subject to the prophets. So I could pray as I willed. And I prayed in this language. And my dad said, well, I recognize some of those words. I'm Ukrainian. He said, it's not Ukrainian, but it's very similar. I recognize the word God, and I recognize the word love. So my father then told these gentlemen, I want to have what you have, which was I just remember my dad at one point sent to God in his 40s. He was in Sacramento at the footsteps of Congress there in a fountain. And at one point, he just got real with God and said, God, I've been searching for you my whole life. I'm done. If you want me, come get me. And so this was kind of the come get me phase several years later, when God began to move in his life. So then he said to Bob and to Charles DeBow there, why don't you guys come over? Which my dad was very, like I'm involved very, very, very much in ministry, so that sometimes I just want to have solitude. Dad was very involved in motivational speaking and helping presidents of companies. And at the end of the day, he was just done with, he needed solitude, But so for him to invite someone over was rather rare. But they came over, and when we began to, we talked story, and then at some point when they began to pray with him, my language changed from this kind of deep, kind of guttural Russian sounding language to, I would say, a heavenly language. And one of the things I asked the Lord, why was it so important in the primitive church, and then through the ages in the Catholic Church, and even now with this renewal, this refreshment of the charisms? Why praying in tongues. That's just bizarre. And at some point, the Lord just gave me this understanding that when I was a young man, several years after that, I led the worship for a Catholic charismatic prayer group in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He still, play the guitar and lead the singing, which is really a cool experience because you just kind of flow with what the Lord's doing there that day. You don't have anything pre-planned. But the people there, half of them were Hispanic. And so they would, at those prayer meetings, they would pray and they would talk in English. But when we were alone having a potluck dinner or something, when they would pray, quite often they would pray in Spanish. And it was so beautiful when they prayed in their natural language, in their native tongue. It would just, their hearts just, it just was so beautiful. But but what happened to me is I was involved in the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, but I had been under catechized. Actually, back in those days, the new catechism hadn't come out. I've got my phone resting on the new Catholic catechism, and I teach from it every day. So I had been under catechized, and I had been in the environment of sola fide, sola scriptura. By faith alone are you saved, and everything you need to know is in the Bible, and only in the Bible, and most of the real significant people that I had listened to were on the radio, etc., before Jim became so big. So I learned about these really ancient writers that were 50 years old, like C.S. Lewis. I loved C.S. Lewis, but I would read only people that wrote in the last 100 years, because the impression from everybody I knew was that Jesus came, and then there was this Bible kind of fell out of the sky, and then there's nothing worth reading until the last 100 years, until the time of Martin Luther. Like there was nothing that happened in that gap. It was like this big dark spot. So what happened, and it's really cool. So I drifted, not from the Lord. I would say the Catholic Church failed me. I was ready, but I did not drift from the Lord. I wasn't a fallen away Catholic. It was just that I wasn't being catechized. So I began to go to non-denominational churches and led youth groups, and had at one point, Eddie, a miraculous healing in the context of a non-Catholic, communion. And I was at a leaders meeting, and we were talking about signs and wonders, and to pray because these signs will follow the believers, and how to pray in that way. And I had a severe back problem. It wasn't a problem. It was just, I could function, but there were times when probably if I could die, I would want to. It was so severe that it would drop me to my knees, and I wouldn't dare even move. I had to sit perfectly still. So I had this severe back issue for about 15 years, 20 years, something like that. And, I would surf, but because the cold water would help me, but afterwards I would pay the price. So not saying I was always debilitated.
Yeah.
There were times when I had to lay in bed for days or longer, but I always felt pain. And I went to the UCLA medical clinic, everywhere. No one could figure out what was wrong. They had no idea what the problem was. And then, so at this leadership conference, they said they did it like a lab. Here's the teaching. Now let's pray. Let's apply it to what we've learned. But one of the leaders said, there's someone here being healed of a back problem. And I go, well, that's everybody, But something happened. They said the person who this happened to heard it carrying bricks. And that was the first time I went to my knees, was I was carrying bricks. And at that moment, I felt the infusion of the Lord. I felt that I knew that God was touching me, and that I was being healed, but I felt no relief. So I went, they invited me up, and again, to have dignity. This wasn't a big showy, emotional with music thing.
Yeah.
Go into this other room and people will pray with you. And another person knocked on the door and came in and said, I just want you to know, I had a sense that, were you in a fight? Because I had a sense that you injured your back kicking someone. And yeah, the next time I dropped to my knees was in martial arts training. I wasn't in a fight, I was training. But I knew that I was healed. And I just remember about 2 weeks later, walking in the grocery store, and suddenly realizing that I have no pain. And I will tell you, it's rare that a second goes by in my life when I don't remember God's mercy. And then you fast forward, my competitive surfing career began to develop, and eventually I became a world champion tandem surfer. Now that's where you lift a woman in very extreme lifts, overhead lifts, while hitting an 8-foot wave. And it's a very dramatic and powerful and beautiful thing. And I became a world champion. And isn't it great that I can say, well, the Lord healed my back, because I couldn't have done that without that. And also, when I won those 2 world titles, I asked a friend of mine, Melody Green. I don't know, many people know who Keith Green is, but I said, it's vainglory, it's a dangerous thing. And she said, no, it'll be the platform that launches your ministry. And that's what happened. I got a book deal with the hottest publisher in the world, Hachette, and it was largely because of that notoriety. And then the radio show, and then the TV show. And then the greatest gift of all for my tandem surfing is that I met my wife on a tandem surfboard.
No kidding.
Yeah, I met her here in Florida. I was competing, and I won't go to the whole story, but it was really something to find this grace-filled, gorgeous, athletic, wise woman to be my helpmate, to be my wife. So that I guess that's the long and short of it. So but then what happened in that time when I began to be in the non-denominational world is they're beautiful people. They love Jesus. I mean, they're sold out, and we have so much to learn from them. I think one of the biggest things Catholics can learn from Protestants is to give money. As a CPA, I see my Catholic clients, and they give tip money to the Lord, and these Protestants give 10%, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's probably why they have joy, because they're joyful givers, right? So that's part of it. And also giving like that is considered spiritual warfare. But it's just that I had so much joy and love there, but I kind of began to get the feeling that I was swimming in the shallow end of the pool. And I had that feeling, is that all there is again? And my dad and my mother had continued on in their Catholic walk. My dad eventually became a Catholic deacon. And one day he started telling me the liturgy of the hour. So I actually began to participate in reading the liturgy. But the office of readings in the back where those old guys write, I'm like, that's yesterday news. I want to know what people are saying today about the Lord. So I didn't read those guys. Like, what an idiot. And then at some point, my dad, my mom gave me the book, This Marriage Supper of the Lamb by Scott Hahn. And I go, yeah, the Eucharist is real. And I knew I was Catholic. I was born Catholic. So I began to kind of go to the Catholic Church again, but I would stand in the back or sit way in the back. And I began to realize, and I would go to communion, not knowing it wasn't appropriate at the time, but I would go up to and receive communion. I began to realize that really is the body, blood, and soul divinity of Jesus Christ. And yet I was kind of like appalled still by the church. Like, dude, talk about culturally shocking to walk into a church for someone who's never been into a Catholic church. Yeah. What are they wearing? Something from the medieval ages, and what are those candles, and don't they have electricity, and why those statues, and and where's the good music? Where's all the I didn't understand that yet. So, but then my mom sent me that book on the Eucharist, but then my dad a few years later sent me this incredible book by Stephen Ray, who I just got to have on my radio show. Last person I interviewed was Stephen Ray, and called Crossing the Tiber. And I'm sure I would think a lot of people that you interview have read his book, but it was a book written to his father, who was, I believe, a Protestant minister or very involved in his faith, about why he was converting to Catholicism, and it was full of footnotes. And it's interesting. He wrote that as a letter to his father, and my father gave me that book as something to me. But I began to be realizing the early church fathers.
Sure.
And so I would read those footnotes, and I began to read those books. And I have all the volumes of the pre-Nicene and ante-Nicene fathers, about a yard's worth of books. now. And then I have the commentaries by the fathers on the Bible. And I thought, I read Augustine first. I'm going to read everything he wrote. And they're like, well, that might take me a few years, you know? And then the Summa, the first time I read the Summa, it was on audiobooks, you know, while I was hiking the beach. But I fell in love with the early church fathers. That's why I have Mike Aquilina on my show a couple times a year. I just love the early church fathers. What I came to find out when I read Justin Martyr's apology to the emperor, and it said in there it talked about the mass, and I believe it's not the epiclesis, the time when the host is consecrated. The words that he used were like, and he wrote this about 150 AD or maybe a little bit earlier. I was like, dude, the primitive church was a Catholic church. What am I doing? And I went roaring back into the faith. And suddenly I'm there, and I'm reading the catechism cover to cover, and I'm spending every night down on the beach with my cigar, with my iPad at night, you know, reading. And people go, come on, let's go meet at Duke's. And I go, no, I'm here with some friends. And like, who are you there with? Augustine, Aquinas. And so I just devoured hundreds of, I wouldn't say hundreds, but my wife has a problem with all my books. I have so many. So I just devoured these books and the early church fathers and the writings of our great teachers. And then my son Shane said to me, he's a videographer. He goes, Dad, you got to have a podcast. And I go, okay. So I start this podcast, and it's just going to be a surfing adventure podcast. But right away, I began to find out the surfers that I interviewed were like, had life-changing stories to tell. Then I found out everybody did. Everybody's Rocky Balboa. Even the little old lady in the pew, she could tell you stories, man. So it became something different. And then the Lord gave me the vision that I would have this radio show that would start in Florida and Hawaii and then go throughout the world. And when I say vision, I had this image when I was praying. I'm not saying it was a real spiritual event, but I knew very clearly what the next thing was to do. So I went to the local Christian radio station in Honolulu, and I began to tell her the need for a manly type radio show. And after about a minute, she interrupted me and she said, you don't have to say anything more. My husband used those exact words last night. We're giving you your hour show, your weekly show. Didn't give, I had to pay for it. And then I was in Florida, in Tampa, and I used to go down to this radio station. I started to co-host a little show whenever I was around. So every now and then, maybe once every 3 or 4 months, it was a Protestant radio station. And one day the manager came in and said, hey, while you were doing this show, we just got word Michael Huckabee is canceling the show because he's going to run for president. Do you want his spot? Drive home Wednesday nights? Sure. So that's what happened. And then I was introduced to someone, Kay Lodwick. I shouldn't tell you her name, I'm sorry. But I was introduced to someone who helped me craft my show. And then she introduced me to maybe 20 different radio stations on EWTN. I went around the country in my car, going and dialoguing with these radio stations. And they have the option on the weekends to kind of do whatever they want. So they started to carry my show. And then the last place I went was to EWTN. And when I got there, we began to talk, and they go, no, Barry, you don't understand. You don't have to convince us. We're going to carry your show. And then they put it on the B list so any station can grab it if they want it. And then eventually they converted it as their A team. So it goes out to everyone. But it was just very interesting, Eddie, as the Lord began to launch this ministry. You have to work hard and be diligent, but promotion comes from the Lord. So when I went to the first EWTN radio conference before EWTN started to carry my show, I mean, I was just trying to figure out what EWTN was. I went there and I brought my book. It was an Amazon bestseller briefly. I brought my book and I gave it to Doug Keck, and I saw he left it behind when he left. You know? But I went to the shrine, and Bishop Baker was there, and I gave him a copy of my book as I went into confession. And when I came out, he was looking for me, and he came up to me And I was there with an EWTN host. I happened to be talking to her, and he said, "Hey, can I get another copy of your book?" And she said, "Well, I didn't bring any with me." He goes, "Oh no, I love your book, but I'm talking to Bear." And so I gave him another copy. And now here's this surfer dude no one's ever heard of, coming out of nowhere, and people are one we like him, but we don't understand him. You know, think about how weird John the Baptist was. I'm not saying I'm that weird, but I came out of nowhere. And I had been in training with the Lord, but as far as EWTN and being on the speaker circuit, they didn't know what to think of me. So on the last night of the event, the main speaker was Bishop Baker. And before he began to speak, he said, "Before I begin my talk, there's someone here everyone needs to meet." And he had me stand up. And it brings tears to my eyes, because, you know, I don't know your story, Eddie, but I know there's blood, sweat, and tears in there. And mine was too. A lot of places where I felt I failed the Lord, you know, and where just a lot of challenges. And then to have that affirmation, it was like everybody looked around, and the woman that was helping me develop my show looked at me with this huge smile. And everyone looked back at me and kind of had the sigh of relief. Well, maybe he is who he said, you know, whatever. And then I began the radio ministry, which then became, because my son and I did action video surfing, it was natural for us to move into doing media for EWTN. We did a reality TV show about surf. We had basically we had a surfing retreat in Cocoa Beach, and we filmed it, and it involved surfing and other things. And they aired that, and then we came up with the concept of the motorcycle TV show. And we were just delivered before I was a little bit late getting to you, because I was pushing the button to deliver season 3 to them. Boy, did I ever talk a long time. I'm sorry.
This is brilliant. I love it. So earlier you were talking about, you approached that station in Honolulu and you said, you know, you're in the need for a manly show. And I know what I read earlier about new evangelization. Can you talk about what you do focus on as it relates to men and heroic virtue?
I love the way you asked that, because people will introduce me. Bear is going to talk about masculine spirituality or the masculine genius. And I said, no, I don't. I talk about manliness, because the ultimate manly person is one who's well informed and formed by his faith and by the brothers he surrounds himself with and by the church, and is surrendered to God's will. And it starts his day out in prayer, seeking God's will and pursuing it, and being a protector, a provider, and a servant to the people God's called him to serve. There's nothing more manly than that. I was with a guy yesterday, William Burke is his name. He's recent Catholic convert, trying to find out how to go a little bit deeper with the Lord. He told me he was a mechanic. His wife brought him to be with us at the beach with her kids. And I go, let me see your hands. And his hands were very gritty looking. And there was grease in the nails that'll probably never, ever come out. And I go, dude, you got hands like Joseph probably had. And probably Jesus before he began his ministry. Because he wasn't, people call him a carpenter, but the Greek word is tekton. He was a builder. And if you've ever been to Israel, they build things out of rock there.
Yeah.
So he was gnarly, right, Eddie? So I told him, look at your hands. They look like St. Joseph's. And I think it just shocked him and affirmed him so powerfully. I think whenever he looks at his hands now, this is what Joseph's hands look like, and Jesus probably in his youth. So men need to, my next book that I'm working on is called The 12 Rules of Manliness. Subtitled Everything I Learned from Eddie Trask about being, no, it's about a page and a half long, but no, I mean, you know, it's you know, I forget which of the people that received one of the apparitions from Mary prophesied that the last battle would be about men and family. Mm-hmm. And so men are obviously under assault, and we need to see the St. Joseph moment. And that it's interesting how that's the year of St. Joseph is right now. We need those men. And, Don Calloway's a surfer. Father Don's a friend of mine. And, his new book, The Consecration to Jesus, talks about this need for, at this moment in time, for the St. Joseph. Mary was first visited and then St. Joseph. And that's kind of the rhythm of what's happening now, because I think it's preparatory to the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
So we need, and what Don Calloway did is he commissioned about a dozen paintings of a manly, more realistically looking Joseph. And one of the most profound paintings he has is Joseph is standing there holding Jesus, and he has his arm outstretched like he's telling someone, don't come any further. Protecting that child. So yeah, men, we go into church today so often, Eddie, it's like you see like a genderless passive male. I got on the Zoom call with youth apologetics, great, cool ministry founded by a young African man that was adopted. He came to America. He's only 16 right now. And he's got this great, and he suffered for Jesus. He basically had to leave his high school because of his stand for pro-life. And so I was talking to them, and they're on Zoom, and there's maybe half a dozen women and maybe 2 or 3 men who have their video on, their camera on.
Sure.
And I said, let's have a two-way dialogue. Turn on your video cameras. And he goes, well, a lot of people here just don't feel comfortable doing that. And I said, turn on your video camera. So the women started turning theirs on, and the men didn't. I just told the men, if you're that passive a male that you won't turn on your video camera, then leave this conversation. And I think they dug on it, and they started to click on. They probably had to go brush their teeth or comb their hair, but they started to click on.
Yeah.
And then I asked the women, what do you have to say to the men? And they go, we need men to be men again. They don't ask us out on dates, and if they date us, they don't ask us to marry them. And we kind of lead the relationship, and we need men. During this whole COVID thing, my wife and I, she's a cowgirl. She used to be in the rodeo. We watched old Westerns because the old Westerns showed virtue.
You did.
Not that they were perfect. And so my new book, I have a sense that each chapter, now my first book, my mentor was Lou Aronica, who was the last editor for the Louis L'Amour. He was the great Western writer, also for Ray Bradbury and a couple other people. But he mentored me. But Louis L'Amour, I have all 105 of his books. Right after I leave here, I'm going to my storage room to ship them back to Hawaii. But there's a song my wife has me listen to that says, "Where have all the cowboys gone?" We need men again. And believe me, men, if you're listening to this, if you want to have a relationship with a good woman, be manly. Be just step forward and be bold and grow in the Lord, serve the Lord. We need men again. Don't be this passive milquetoast kind of Ned Flanders guy. That you don't be nice anymore. I've actually been introduced to people saying, they'll say to me, "This is Bear Woznick. He's a really nice guy." I go, "No, I'm not." "Well, yeah, you're really a nice guy." "No, I'm not. I'm not a nice guy. I'm a good man. I hope to be, but I'm not nice. I mean, you don't want to cross me. I give people a lot of room, but there's a line you're not going to cross. And I'm a little bit dangerous, especially when I pray. My wife and I, the other day, I was praying for someone at breakfast. Don't ask me to pray for the opening prayer at breakfast. And I was praying for this man who was the president of the bank, who's going on a new venture. And I prayed for his God to give him new and right desires and for his wildest dreams to come true, kind of like the Napoleon Dynamite prayer. And the waitress overheard it. She goes, "That was a dangerous prayer." So the men need to be dangerous. Men need to know how to protect people. If you're not trained in a martial art, you ought to know the jab, punch, hook, uppercut at least. I mean, you need to be physically dangerous. You need to lay down your life in making an income. By the way, men, you don't need to have a fulfilling career. work in and of itself is fulfilling. Just doing work excellently does something to a man. Being a welder, or like this man yesterday, being a mechanic, doing a job well is fulfilling. Oh, I need to go to this because it's going to be so fulfilling for me. Just any job, any work that you do, and believe me, we need our tradespeople back, but we don't need the guy who went and got his master's degree in liberal arts and works at Starbucks. We don't need that guy. We need the guy who's saying, I'm gonna pursue something so that, like, when I'm old enough or I meet someone, or the woman I'm with now, that I can provide for this family, that I can be a wall of protection. So, I mean, manliness, I don't call it manly spirituality, or I don't call it masculine spirituality. I just call it being manly. And it's really, love that word because it's so politically incorrect.
Love it. Love it. One more thing before you go. Can you speak to, he's had so much to say about the non-denominational community, and my wife and I were there for 10 years before I reverted 18 months ago to the Catholic Church, and she was,
how cool.
Yeah, and she was received into the church just over a year ago. So do you continue that dialogue? Do you see some people writing to you? Go ahead. Yeah.
Friend. Yesterday I was with Gerard Middleton. He used to be a Southern Baptist minister. He has so much wisdom for me. Has such a devotion to the Lord. Of course, they're part of the body of Christ, which to me means they're part of the Catholic Church. They're just not in communion with us. Mm-hmm. I interviewed Bishop Strickland, who's in Texas.
Yeah.
And maybe 5% of the people there are Catholic, but he considers every single person there, every single Christian there, part of his flock. Because we're one. The body of Christ is one, and people may not be in communion with us, but we got a lot to learn from them. We're just really fortunate, aren't we?
Yeah.
To be in the Catholic Church. I think they have a lot to learn from us. I think I have a lot of non-Catholics that listen to my catechism show, because I say the Catholic Church is the thinking man's religion. It makes sense, Yeah. You mix in a little of the philosophers, Aquinas did, distill, taking the best of Aristotle, and look at Plato the way Augustine did, and the early church fathers, the Greek fathers. We have a lot. Catholicism, God gave us a brain for a reason. It says, come, let us reason together. So Catholicism makes sense. The Catholic Church makes, when you syllogize one thing to the next, it makes sense. And I gave the catechism to a friend of mine who was actually molested when he was a child. And then he went to the Catholic priest to say, I was molested. And the priest tried to make his moves on him, right? So he left the Catholic Church, but he loves Jesus, and he's a Protestant minister to the homeless. But he read the Catholic Catechism cover to cover, and he said what he loved about it was so humble. It presented the Catholic way with such clarity, and submitted it to you to reason and think about.
Yes.
And I think as the pendulum swings back, and the atheists and the agnostics begin to realize the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, like Dawkins, maybe he forgot to wear his best, as being, what is it, the horseman of the new enlightenment or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to want to have, they're going to need to be reasoned back into the faith. You can't just pull out a Bible verse and say, like someone said the other day, I was with someone a few years ago, we're having coffee, and this man overheard us and go, that book you have that you're reading out of? That's not nothing but a bunch of mythological stuff. I wouldn't touch that garbage. And then what this man did is he opened the scripture and gave him a quote. That's not going to work. He just said, I'm not going to, but you can approach him with, well, that's an interesting question. Why do you say that?
Yeah.
And Catholics have the 5 reasons of Aquinas, and other, we have these, we have Anselm, we have ability to reason people to the point, and there is that point where it's a leap of faith, but we can bring them there. And I think as these atheists start getting older, and it's no longer cool to be an atheist, and they realize pornography is nothing but gives them more emptiness, they're going to be looking for answers, and Catholics are the best capable of giving them those answers.
Wow. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Bear. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to meeting you soon here. So
yeah, we'll get, and I'm going to invite you to be on my show. We'll do that in probably a couple of months after I meet you. We'll get you on. But I'm looking forward to seeing you in Boise.
All right.
Are you going to come? Are you coming to Cigar Night?
Yeah, I'll be there.
You're going to be there for it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you, folks, for watching this week's episode. As a reminder, subscribe to my channel. And until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.